Welcome to Halacha in a Year, where we can get to learn all the most relevant halacha through the prism of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. You are listening to Rabbi Ya'akov Trump. This year is kindly sponsored by the Moshe Group and CA in zechus of Rivka Biela, bas נחמה שיפרה, and in honor of Rabbi Trump. We now trace the halachas of Mishloach Manos, Matanos Levyonim, and Seudas Purim. This is Siman Kuf Membez, the 142nd chapter in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Let's jump straight into some of those halachas. The first concept is Mishloach Manos. The Megillah itself commands us that the way that Purim is to be celebrated in ritual is for people to give gifts to each other, to create fraternity, to create bonds between different Jews. So a few basic questions. How much must one send? So one needs to send two different types of food to one person. That's the minimal basic requirement. What's the upper limit? There's no upper limit. The more the better. The more a person does, the better it is. However, he does mention what the Rambam says, which is that it's better to spend more money on Matanos Levyonim, gifts to the poor, than to give gifts to one's friend as well. And he makes the comment, Ein simcha gedola mufu'eres. There's no greater and more splendid simcha in front of Hashem, ela lesameach leiv aniyim v'yosomim v'almonos, to make happy those who are impoverished, those who live alone, v'mesameach leiv amulolim ha'olen, people who make these souls happy. Doimel Shechina is similar to Hashem. Shneimar lachayos ruach shvalim olachayos nev nidkoim. That's what Hashem does, and we're replicating His actions. What constitutes a mana? What is a portion? So it must be something which is readily edible, so it cannot be raw meat. When can this mitzvah be done? It's only done on the day of Purim. It cannot be done at the night, although it might be more convenient because there's less congestion at night on the roads. But it must be done during the day. What is an Avel's obligation in this? An Avel must give Mishloach Manos, but he or she may not receive Matanos, may not receive Mishloach Manos directly themselves. As a family, they may receive it, not as an individual. Move to our next concept, and that's Matanos Levyonim, gifts to the poor. Again, another way this is that Esther and Mordechai ritualized Purim's celebration. They say this in the Megillah, is to give gifts to the poor. A few basic questions. How many gifts must be given? So it needs to be 2 gifts to 2 poor people. If someone reaches out and to ask for alms, for charity, do I need to investigate the cause like I usually do? No. On Purim, there's a halacha called kol hapoishet yad. Anybody who sticks out their hand, you give to, which means say, come prepared. Make sure you've got dollars in your pockets so you're able to distribute to those who ask when needed. This is generally also seen as a Kabbalistic concept, that kol hapoishet yad. It's a day of tefillah when we ask Hashem for unjustifiable good in our own lives. Hopefully Hashem answers us without doing too much investigation and auditing when it comes to our deservingness. What if there are no poor people around? So 3 options. Plan ahead and donate to shuls or organizations which will give and distribute on Purim when there are people around. Number 2 is keep the money aside and give it to them when you interact with them, or dispatch it on Purim, meaning to say, make sure that it's being sent. Are women obligated in Mishloach Manos and Matanos Levyonim? The answer is yes. And it's best. He does make the note, it's best for women to send Mishloach Manos to women and men to men. And tzedakah, this is less of a concern. Generally speaking, families usually send to families, but if a person's living alone, then it's best for it to be woman to woman and man to man. When can this mitzvah be done? So only on the day of Purim. Again, although it may be convenient at night, it has to be done during the day. What is an Avel's obligation in this? So a person who's in Avelos lo aleinu, they must give and they may receive as well as Matanos Levyonim. Move to our third concept, which is the Seudas Purim, which is the feast on the day of Purim. Again, the Megillah tells us that chayavim ne'echol l'ishtos lismah Purim. You have to eat, drink, and be merry on Purim. It's a day of merriment and happiness because of the miracles that occurred at that time. When is the mitzvah? So it's primarily in the day, but there is a residual experience at night, so a person should have a little more to eat at night. What about when Purim is on a Sunday, and therefore Purim starts on a Motzei Shabbos? So the Kitzur advises having a little less to eat at Seudas Shlishis, so that the person will also be able to enjoy having something to eat and in celebration of Purim. Obviously, Halacha relating to the fact that our experiences are not just cerebral, they are emotional and also physical, and therefore eating is an experience of joy as well. When can this mitzvah be done? So mainly on the day of Purim. When specifically in the day? So one should first daven mincha and then have a Seudah. Can it run into the night? It can run over into the night, but it should be primarily a majority of the Seudah should be in the day. What if Purim falls out on a Friday? So then it's best to do the Seudah in the morning, or at least starting before Chatzos, so that before midday, so that the Seudah does not interfere with Shabbos. What else needs to be done? So it is best to learn Torah before the Seudah. any special menu items. So besides for meat and wine, the minhag is to eat seeds and legumes, and this is to commemorate the sacrifices Daniel and his friends made at the times when they were squires in the Babylonian court. They refused to eat non-kosher food, and they only ate seeds and legumes. And this is one of the reasons why some of the humantashen have inside them the seeds, why they have man inside them, and this is reflecting this as well. Esther learnt this from Daniel, who was Hassach, which is why it relates to Purim, just those few years later. Why is wine so central? So we know that the wine was a central part of the miracle. The many of the Seudas, which happened, Esther called Achashverosh and Haman to the Seudas on wine, and therefore we commemorate it with wine, and a person should have it to a drink. How much? So the upper limit is the Mordechai. A person should be intoxicated to the point they don't know the difference between the good and the bad. However, the way it's regulated is lefachos. It should be at the very least yishteh yosa merhergelo. A person should drink a little more than they used to. So that means half a cup. It means now 3/4 of a cup, and to remember this great nace. And then they should take a rest. And this way, in their sleep, they're also oblivious to the difference between Mordechai and Haman, and fulfill this obligation in that respect. The Kitzur does add it in at the end of this over here. He says a person who is weak by nature, aka a male and under the age of 25. And if a person does get drunk, knows that if they get drunk, they will be disgraceful to certain mitzvahs or to brachos or to tefillah, or just will be lightheaded and frivolous if they get intoxicated, then that person should not engage in this activity. This is one is losing out more than one is gaining. And he articulates again, Kol ma'asav yiyu l'shem shamayim. All his actions should be for the sake of heaven. Finally, last concept, just a few miscellaneous halachas, and that is, what about work, which is work on Purim? So generally speaking, one should not work on Purim. The Kitzur quotes the idea that Misha Oisa Boy Melacha, a person does work, and Araya Oisa Melacha Siman Bracha Lo'olam is not going to see blessing from that work on Purim. What about hiring a non-Jew to do? That's no problem. One shouldn't be engaged in work oneself. What are permitted melachos? So one's allowed to do melacha to prepare for Purim or the Purim Suda. One is allowed to write letters. One's allowed to get involved in work that if one does not engage in, one will lose money for, or just, he says, pragmatia trade, which is a lot easier to arrange. What are the halachas of the 15th of Adar, the day after Purim in regular cities? That's called Shushan Purim. There's no tachnun, no keler chapayim before laning, no hatzeach, the end of davening, no fasting, no eulogies. We do have extra feasting, and there's no al nisim, and one can make a wedding on Shushan Purim. What about Purim Katan? So if, let's say, we have 2 Adars in a leap year, the 14th and 15th of Adar Rishon are called Purim Katan and Shushan Purim Katan, and there's no tachnun, no keler chapayim, no hatzeach, and no fasting, no eulogies on those days. However, on the 14th of Adar Aleph, some people have the minhag to have a larger meal as a commemoration for anticipation of that Purim. With this, we conclude the very fascinating halachas of Purim that relates to Matanos, Levyonim, Mishloach, Manos, and the Seudas. Have a wonderful and very meaningful day.